Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely different.
Usually we take a topic, maybe a historical event or some new scientific breakthrough, and we explore it. We look at the narrative, we look at the facts, we just try to make sense of the world.
Right.
But today we are stepping into what I can really only describe as a crime scene.
That is exactly what it is.
I mean, I'm looking at this stack of documents we have on the table here, and frankly, it looks less like a history lesson and much more like a forensic crime scene report.
It's a very heavy stack today. And in this particular crime scene, you have to understand the setting we're walking into.
Okay.
There's no yellow tape here. There's no chalk outline on the sidewalk. There are no shell casings to bag up.
Because the weapon wasn't a gun?
Exactly. The weapon used in this crime wasn't a gun. It wasn't, smallpox blankets either. The weapon was a pen.
A pen and a ledger.
And a legislative assembly.
Yeah.
We are literally conducting an audit today.
An audit?
Yes. The sources you've provided, they build this really comprehensive, arguably terrifying case for what the authors call a paper genocide.
That phrase right there, paper genocide,
Yeah.
it's heavy.
It is.
It sends a literal shiver down the spine because it implies a destruction that didn't happen on a battlefield.
Right.
It implies that you could wipe out an entire people, not by killing them physically, but by killing them legally, by just erasing their name from the book of law.
Exactly that. And the victim in this scenario, according to the extensive sources we are looking at, is the legal identity of an entire continent's original population.
The whole continent.
The whole continent. The central mystery we are unpacking today is arguably one of the biggest identity heists in human history.
Identity heist. I like that phrasing.
Well, the argument in this dossier is that a specific group of people, the original sedentary landlords of the American South, they weren't wiped out by disease or warfare to the extent that we are traditionally told in school.
Right, the standard narrative of them just fading away.
Exactly. Instead, they were reclassified.
They were laundered. Like money.
Precisely like money. But instead of hiding the source of illicit cash to make it look clean, the government hid the source of the people to make the land title look clean.
Wow.
Yeah. This is a story about a massive fiduciary breach. And to really understand it, we have to play the role of forensic auditors today.
So no emotions, just paperwork.
We aren't looking at feelings today at all. We are looking at the paperwork. We are looking at the actual text of the 1705 Virginia Slave Act. We are looking at Thomas Jefferson's private linguistic notes.
Which are fascinating, by the way.
They blow the lid off things. And we're also looking at modern forensic DNA reports and the bureaucratic hit lists, literally hit lists, of the 1924 Racial Integrity Act.
So if you're listening to this right now, I want you to imagine you aren't just listening to a normal deep dive today.
Right.
You are a senior investigative historian, you are a forensic genealogist, and you've basically been hired to audit the books of the United States government.
And the charge on the docket is identity laundering and title theft.
It's a serious charge.
It's massively serious. And to follow this audit, we really have to start by defining our terms. The sources use two very specific categories to track this entire shell game.
Okay.
We are going to call them Group A and Group B.
Let's stop and drill down on this right now. The core thesis, Group A versus Group B, because if we don't get this right, literally the rest of the evidence won't make any sense.
Right. Group A, according to our investigative dossier, represents the autochthonous allodial landlords.
Okay, that is a mouthful of legal jargon.
It is.
Let's break that down for everyone. First word, autochthonous.
Autochthonous comes from the Greek. It literally means sprung from the earth.
Sprung from the earth.
Yeah, it refers to the original inhabitants of a place. Not people who migrated there recently, but the people who emerged there. The deep, deep roots, the absolute origin point.
Okay, and allodial.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like something from a terribly boring real estate exam.
It is, but it's a concept that barely exists anymore for the average person today. Allodial title is the highest possible form of ownership known to law.
The highest form.
The absolute highest. It means you own the land, absolutely. You are beholden to no superior landlord. There is no king above you. There is no government above you.
So you don't pay property taxes.
You don't pay property tax in the sense of rent to the state because you are the sovereign of that dirt. The state doesn't own it. You do.
So Group A are the people who held that absolute original title.
Correct. The sources argue that Group A represents the copper-toned, melanated, sedentary populations that were building the massive mound cities, the temple complexes, and the huge agricultural systems in the Americas long, long before Columbus ever showed up.
But, and I think here is the real trick of this whole deep dive today, this specific group is largely classified as African American or Negro.
That is the absolute crux of the fraud. The sources argue Group A has been hidden in plain sight this entire time. They were the landlords, but they've been completely rebranded as the labor force.
Which brings us to Group B. Who are they in this framework? Because usually when we talk about indigenous people in America, we have a very specific image in our minds.
Group B is what the sources call the placeholder group.
Placeholder.
Yes. These are the federally recognized tribes we see today. The sources describe them as having more Asiatic or nomadic origins, often associated with that standard Bering Strait migration narrative we all learned about.
Right.
The argument is that while Group B has trust status,
Trust status. Okay, we need to clarify that. That's different from allodial.
it's the exact opposite of allodial. In a trust relationship, the government actually holds the legal title to the land. The tribe simply has occupancy rights, or what they call beneficial use.
Meaning they just get to live there.
They get to live there, but legally they are domestic dependent nations. They are, for all intents and purposes, wards of the state.
So Group B does not hold the original allodial title that Group A held.
No, they do not. Their title is strictly derivative. It comes from the United States. Group A's title predates the United States entirely.
So the core mission of this deep dive is to uncover how the government completely swapped the beneficiaries. How they took the title from Group A, labeled them as Negro so they legally couldn't claim the land anymore, and then installed Group B as the official face of indigeneity to basically manage the real estate.
That is the fiduciary breach we are investigating. It's a story of identity laundering on a continental scale. And to see how they pulled it off, how they actually executed this, we have to go back way earlier than the Civil War.
We need to look at the legal mechanism of the erasure itself.
We need to look at 1705.
Let's dive right into that. Section 1 of our forensic audit, the legal mechanism of erasure. We have the text of the Virginia Slave Act of 1705 right here on the table.
We do.
Now, most people hear Slave Act and they immediately think, okay, this is about labor. This is about working in the tobacco field.
Or they just think it's about pure cruelty. And it was incredibly cruel, undeniably. But remember, we are looking at it forensically today.
We're looking at the business logic behind it.
Precisely, the cold, calculated business logic.
You've highlighted a specific phrase in Chapter 23 of this act that basically changes everything we think we know.
It completely changes the legal definition of the human being in question. The act explicitly declares that all Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves were to be held as real estate.
Real estate. I want to pause on that because that is wild. Not personal property, not chattel.
Explicitly not chattel, and that legal distinction is absolutely everything.
Break that down for us. What is the actual functional difference in the law between owning a person as chattel and owning them as real estate?
Okay, in legal terms, chattel is movable property.
Like a chair.
Like a chair, a cow, a wagon, a piece of furniture. You can sell it, you can move it to another state, you can destroy it. It is entirely distinct from the land itself.
Okay.
Real estate is the land itself, and it includes things permanently attached to the land, like a barn or a farmhouse.
So why on earth did they classify these living people as real estate?
Because it was a highly sophisticated financial maneuver. By classifying these people, specifically noting the Indian slaves and mulattoes as real estate, the colonial government was actually solving a massive banking problem.
A banking problem. In 1705,
Yes. Think about it. If I'm a colonial planter in 1705 and I need a massive, massive loan from a merchant bank over in London or Amsterdam to expand my tobacco operations, I need collateral.
right, you need to put something of value up to secure that loan.
Exactly. I can't easily use my movable chattel slaves as collateral for a 30-year mortgage.
Because they might run away.
They might run away. They might die of disease. They are incredibly risky assets for a bank to loan against. But land
Stays put.
is stable. It doesn't run away. By legally fusing the Indian and the Negro into the single category of real estate, the workforce instantly became part of the land's official valuation. They literally became commercial collateral.
So the people effectively became the currency of the American South. They weren't just workers anymore. They were the actual mortgage.
Precisely. They were the equity. But there is a much, much darker side to this coin, specifically regarding their sovereignty.
This is where the genocide part of paper genocide actually kicks in.
Yes, because if a person is classified under the law as real estate, they cannot legally own real estate.
Because property cannot own property.
Exactly.
A shovel can't own a garden. A barn can't own the farmhouse.
It is a complete legal impossibility. By converting the indigenous population group A into real estate, the state effectively extinguished their ability to hold any title to their own land. It completely stripped them of the legal capacity to be landlords.
It's a concept the sources refer to as civiliter mortuus.
Civil death. They were dead in the eyes of the law.
Wow.
It didn't matter if they were standing right there on the exact same land their ancestors had cultivated for 10,000 years. It didn't matter if they knew the name of every single river and mountain.
None of it mattered.
Legally, they had ceased to be people with rights. They had become the land itself solely to be owned by someone else.
In this act, it lumps Negro, mulatto, and Indian together in one sentence. The sources make a really fascinating point about the physical descriptions used here. We tend to think Negro automatically implies from Africa.
Yeah.
We think it's a strict geographic marker. But the dossier points to the terms Moorish and swarthy being used constantly to describe people who were already here in the Americas.
This is a crucial pivot in the investigation. We really have to unlearn the modern definitions of these words. The sources reference these historical black boy taverns in England and the physical descriptions of King Charles II.
Wait, the King of England? He was called Black Boy.
Yes, King Charles II, who reigned back in the late 1600s, was literally nicknamed the Black Boy by his own mother and his subjects.
Why? Was it just because of his dark hair or something?
It was because of his actual complexion.
All right.
The historical records describe him over and over as swarthy, black-haired, dark-skinned. He looked Moorish.
Okay.
The sources mention that these black boy taverns popped up all over England, named specifically after him. The whole argument here is that black or Moorish features melanated skin, dark eyes. They were not entirely synonymous with African slave in the way we automatically assume today. Swarthy people were actually quite common in Europe. Think of the Black Douglas clan in Scotland, or the Black Irish, or various Iberian populations.
So you had swarthy Europeans coming over, and you had swarthy Americans already here.
Precisely. And the source material suggests that the Great American Colonial Melting Pot was actually more of a classification pot.
A classification pot.
Yes. Many of the so-called African arrivals were actually reclassified Indigenous People Group A, or they were swarthy political prisoners from Europe, like the Jacobites, who were shipped over and just thrown into the exact same Negro legal bucket as the locals.
Because it was a mixing bowl designed to intentionally hide the origin of the people.
Exactly.
If everyone on the plantation is legally just a Negro, you stop asking, which tribe are you from? Or which country were you deported from? You just ask, who owns you?
That is the ultimate utility of the label. It completely erases national identity and replaces it entirely with a commercial status. It transforms a sovereign into a subject and then a subject into a product.
Okay, let's unpack the difference between these populations a bit further, because the outline really emphasizes distinguishing Group A from Group B.
We have to keep them distinct.
We've established that Group A is the landlord class that got legally erased. Physically, how do the historical sources actually describe them?
So sources are remarkably consistent and quite specific. Group A is described repeatedly as copper-toned, melanated, and swarthy. But culturally, the distinction is even more important than the physical one. Group A was sedentary.
Sedentary meaning they stayed put. They built things. They weren't wandering around following herds.
They were the temple builders, the mound builders. We are talking about massive, complex civilizations like the Mississippians who built Cahokia.
Right.
Cahokia was a city in North America that was literally larger than London was at the exact same time. The dossier argues that these millions of people didn't just magically vanish into thin air. They were the ones suddenly working the fields.
And the sources point out a pretty massive mathematical impossibility in the standard slave trade narrative regarding this, don't they?
They do. This is one of those wait a minute moments in the entire audit. Let's look at the 1860 census.
Okay.
You have roughly 4 million enslaved people recorded in the United States at that time. Now go look at the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database.
Which is very meticulously kept.
It is. It documents about 400,000 arrivals from Africa to North America over the entire duration of the trade.
Wait, so 400,000 people somehow became 4 million people?
In a relatively short amount of time, under the most brutal, horrific conditions imaginable, with incredibly high infant mortality and very low life expectancy.
That doesn't make sense.
The sources argue the math simply doesn't work. Human populations under that kind of severe physical stress don't explode exponentially like that. It's demographic alchemy. Unless you're reclassifying a massive local population group A and just labeling them as Negroes.
Right.
If you take the indigenous people who are already standing right there, who are already perfectly adapted to the climate, who already know exactly how to grow the tobacco and the cotton because they've literally been doing it for centuries.
And you just legally change their status on paper to Negro.
Suddenly, the numbers make perfect sense.
So the term Negro becomes a legal net. It's used to capture the massive indigenous workforce that was already living on the land. It's a paper capture.
Right. Now, compare that entirely to Group B. The sources define Group B as the placeholder group.
These are the folks we see in the old Western movies.
Generally, yes. These are the populations often associated with the Asiatic or Mongolian phenotype. Lighter skin, straight hair, high cheekbones. The narrative presented here implies these groups were largely nomadic, or that they arrived via much later, different migration routes, like across the Bering Strait.
And the government treats them completely differently. This isn't just about looks, it's about their legal standing in the courts.
Very differently. Group B became the Treaty Indians. They were officially placed on reservations. They have that trust relationship with the United States that we talked about.
Let's clarify that trust relationship again. Because honestly, trust sounds like a good thing.
It sounds positive, but in law, trust often implies a lack of legal competence.
Oh.
Yeah. In a trust, you have a trustee, that's the U.S. government, who holds the actual legal title to the property. And then you have a beneficiary, the tribe, who gets to live there.
Okay.
But the beneficiary does not own the land in the sense that they can sell it to another country or claim absolute sovereignty over it against the trustee. The U.S. government holds the ultimate title.
Whereas Group A, the original landlords we're talking about, they held a allodial title, absolute ownership that predates the U.S. government entirely.
Correct. And here is the massive strategic problem for the U.S. government at the time. You cannot sign a valid treaty with someone who owns the land better than you do. You have to either conquer them totally or legally erase them. And since they couldn't physically wipe out millions of Group A people because they desperately needed them for labor, they used what the sources call the human shield strategy.
Explain the human shield.
They recognized Group B as the official Indians. Group B signs the treaties. Group B cedes the land. Group B acts as the permanent face of indigeneity. This entirely solves the government's paperwork problem.
Because the U.S. gets a piece of paper saying they got the land title legally from Group B.
Yes.
But the land actually belonged to Group A all along.
That is the core allegation of this audit. Group B was effectively ceding land that wasn't fully theirs to cede in the first place. Meanwhile, Group A is out stripping tobacco in the fields, officially classified as Negro real estate, completely and totally unaware that their identity and their land has been legally stolen.
It's the perfect crime. The victims are still standing right there on the scene, but they don't even know who they are anymore. And the general public sees Indians on reservations out west and assumes, okay, well, that's where the indigenous people are.
It perfectly satisfies the public narrative. It closes the loop. It allows the government to claim they obtained the continent legally through treaty rather than through massive theft and administrative fraud.
This is a radical rewriting of the historical narrative.
It is.
But I can hear a listener right now saying, okay, this is a very compelling theory, but where is the proof? Where is the hard scientific data? And the dossier drops an absolute bomb here from an incredibly unlikely source, Thomas Jefferson.
The lid blower, as the sources actually call it. We're looking at Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia. It was published in 1784.
Okay.
Now, Jefferson, regardless of what else you know about him, was a polymath. He was a scientist, a farmer, an architect, and he was a very dedicated linguist.
Right.
He was utterly obsessed with Indian languages. He actively collected extensive vocabulary lists from tribes all over the territories.
And he noticed something in that data that completely violated the standard Old World to New World migration theory.
He noticed the linguistic data simply didn't fit the story they were telling. Jefferson noted that over in Asia and Europe, language families were relatively uniform.
Meaning they sound similar.
Meaning you have vast, massive geographic areas speaking variations of the exact same root tongues. You can easily trace all Romance languages back to Latin. You can trace Slavic languages back to a common root.
Right, you can literally draw the family tree.
But here in America, He found hundreds of radically distinct language families packed into the continent, languages that had absolutely no grammatical or vocabulary connection to each other whatsoever,
They were just entirely different.
completely alien to one another. He called it radical diversity.
And there is a biological and linguistic law regarding this kind of diversity, right? The center of origin principle.
Yes. It's a very standard rule of thumb in evolutionary biology and linguistics. The region with the highest amount of diversity is almost always the oldest source population.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Think of a vase shattering on the floor.
Okay.
The pieces of glass are smallest and most numerous exactly at the point of impact. As you move further away from where it dropped, the pieces get bigger and fewer.
That makes sense.
It takes time, thousands and thousands of years, for a single root language to fracture into 100 completely distinct, unrelated languages.
So if people came from Asia recently, across the land bridge, as the Bering Strait theory suggests,
Then America should have far less linguistic diversity than Asia. It should look like a recent colony with just a few languages that are obviously related to an Asian root.
but it has more diversity.
It has way more. Jefferson looked at this hard data and hypothesized a reverse migration.
Reverse migration, let that sink in.
He suggested that the American populations were likely much older than the Asiatic ones, that the migration might have actually gone out of America and into Asia.
Wait, so Thomas Jefferson, founding father, president, thought people might have migrated from America to Asia?
That was his actual hypothesis based on the linguistic data he collected. He effectively argued that America is the true Old World.
If America is the old world, then literally everything is upside down.
Exactly. If the primary human migration went out of America, then the Asiatic Native Americans Group B might actually be the descendants of people who left America, mixed in Asia for thousands of years, and then came back over the strait much later.
While Group A?
While Group A, the deep indigenous, they just stayed put the whole time. They are the rootstock.
This implies that the people who look African Group A didn't necessarily come from Africa at all.
The sources argue forcefully that the African phenotype is actually a global indigenous phenotype, that the Negro look dark skin, woolly hair was present naturally in the Americas, down in Australia, in Southeast Asia, and in Africa.
It was just the human default.
It was the base layer of humanity everywhere.
Yeah.
By legally convincing Group A that they exclusively came from Africa, the government successfully severed their psychological and legal tie to the American soil.
That is massive.
It changes everything.
If that's true, it means the history books aren't just a little wrong. They are completely inverted. But let's look at the hard science of today to back this up. We have modern forensic DNA evidence in this stack, too. We really need to talk about the receipts.
We have to talk about the clean match anomaly. When modern geneticists sequence modern federally recognized tribes Group B, they often run into a really glaring problem.
What's this problem?
They compare their DNA to the absolute oldest ancient American remains. They find skeletons like the Clovis child known as Anzac I or Kennewick Man. These are remains that are 10,000 to 12,000 years old.
And they don't match.
They don't match as cleanly or directly as you would statistically expect if Group B were the sole uninterrupted descendants of those ancient people. There is a distinct genetic distance.
Now, meaning they aren't the direct kids of the oldest bones.
Right. The expert interpretation presented here is that Group B represents that later Asiatic and Siberian migration we just discussed.
Wow.
They are related to the ancients, but they are distant cousins, not direct descendants.
But here's where it gets really, really interesting for this audit. The dossier points to very specific GED match findings for Black Americans, our Group A.
This is a red flag the sources talk about. When Black Americans take their raw DNA data and run it through advanced forensic tools like GED match tools that dig much deeper than the basic commercial summary you get in the mail, they are finding something completely startling.
What exactly are they finding in the data?
They are finding very persistent genetic segments of Paleo-American, ancient steppe, and R1b markers. We are talking about small segments, usually between 1 to 5 centimorgans.
Now wait, I've used those commercial DNA sites before. Usually, anything below 7 centimorgans, they explicitly tell you to just ignore it. They call it noise.
And that is exactly what the sources call the noise excuse. This is where the commercial ancestry industry differs wildly from actual forensic science.
How so?
Commercial companies like 23andMe or Ancestry, they actively filter out those small segments because their algorithms are exclusively calibrated to a very modern time frame.
Like finding your living relatives.
Exactly. They're looking for your great-grandmother, or maybe trying to connect you to a fourth cousin in Ohio. They are only looking back maybe 500 years tops.
So to them, small segments are irrelevant because they are just too old to help find a cousin.
Right, they just clog up the consumer report. But in professional forensic ancient DNA analysis, those small, sticky segments are absolute gold.
Golds.
Yes, they are the biological receipt. A 3 centimorgan match to a 12,000-year-old skeleton isn't noise at all. It's hard evidence of a deep, unbroken genetic thread.
Because it survived.
It means that tiny piece of DNA has successfully survived biological recombination for hundreds and hundreds of generations. It's a genetic crumb that leads all the way back to the original loaf.
So when a Black American looks at their report and sees 0.5% Native American, or it says unassigned or noise, the sources are arguing that this is actually the remnant of 15,000 years of continuous residence on this continent.
Precisely. It's the literal echo of the deep ancestor. And specifically, the constant presence of haplogroup R1b in these populations is heavily flagged in our sources.
Let's talk about R1b, because that's usually called the Western European marker, isn't it?
Usually, yes. It is the most common genetic marker in modern Western Europe. But the dossier argues very strongly that R1b is also an ancient maritime lineage, one that was fully present in the Americas long, long before Columbus arrived, and it's heavily linked to that Moorish seafaring phenotype we discussed earlier.
Okay, so if a Black man in America tests his DNA and has R1b, the standard historical story is always, oh, that comes from a white slave owner.
That is the immediate knee-jerk assumption. It must be admixture.
Right.
But the sources forcefully challenge that assumption. They argue that if R1b is frequently found in deep indigenous populations, which some isolated studies strongly suggest it is, then its widespread presence in Group A isn't just from white masters mixing into the population.
It's theirs.
Yes, it's an original indigenous marker of the ancient Atlantic American maritime civilization.
That challenges every single assumption we have about race and genetics today. It suggests that race was a category entirely invented to hide lineage.
It suggests that we are looking at our own DNA through a highly political lens, not an objective scientific one.
What?
If you start with the biased assumption that there were no Black indigenous people, then you will automatically categorize all Black DNA as African and all European-looking DNA as white admixture.
You leave absolutely no bucket for the actual indigenous Group A to exist in.
None. You interpret them completely out of existence.
This naturally leads us to the administrative mechanism of how they actually solidified this on paper.
Yeah.
We talked about the 1705 Act, but the real nail in the coffin seems to be much, much more recent. We need to talk about Walter Plecker and the Racial Integrity Act of 1924.
Walter Plecker. If there is a singular villain in this entire forensic audit, it is absolutely him.
Who was he?
He was the Registrar of Vital Statistics for the state of Virginia in the early 20th century. And he was a man utterly obsessed with what he called mongrelization.
He didn't want the races mixing.
He was terrified of it. He wanted a strictly binary world, pure white and pure black. And he viewed the Indian category on census forms as a dirty category.
Oh.
He famously wrote that there were no real Indians left in Virginia at all, only mongrels who were actively trying to pass as Indian just to escape the severe legal restrictions placed on Negroes.
So what did he do? Did he decide to just eliminate the Indian category?
He did it administratively. He implemented exactly what the sources call pencil genocide.
Pencil genocide.
He sent out incredibly strict official instructions to every doctor, every midwife, and every county clerk across the entire state of Virginia. And he famously created a hit list of surnames.
Wait, a hit list of names? Like what?
Common indigenous family names in Virginia. Names like Beverly, Sorrel, and dozens of others.
And what were the instructions regarding this list?
He explicitly said if you deliver a baby with one of these names, or if a person has even one single drop of African blood, or, frankly, if they simply look colored to you, you are strictly forbidden from classifying them as Indian.
You have to check a different box.
You have to check the box for Negro or colored, by law.
So, literally with the stroke of a pen, he moved entire families from being international sovereigns with actual treaty rights to being Jim Crow subjects with absolutely no rights.
He completely stripped them of their legal standing overnight. And this is so crucial for the audit. If you are officially a Negro in 1924 Virginia, you have zero claim to any tribal lands.
Right.
You have zero claim to federal treaties. You are a citizen, a second-class one, but a citizen of the U.S. workforce. You are Real estate again.
And he did this retroactively too, didn't he? Going
Yeah.
back into the archives and physically changing older birth certificates.
He absolutely did. He altered historical records. He aggressively threatened local midwives with jail time if they dared to register a child as Indian. He successfully created a complete statistical elimination of the native tribes in Virginia.
And because Virginia was such a major population center historically, this administrative model directly influenced how the census was taken across the rest of the country.
It became the blueprint.
And this brings us right back to the Group A and Group B dynamic we started with. The government truly needed Group B to exist, didn't they?
They absolutely did. This is the heart of the placeholder strategy. Think about it. Imagine you have a massive estate, the whole North American continent.
Okay, I'm with you.
You've successfully, legally killed the actual owner Group A by reclassifying them as colored via Plecker and that 1705 Act. But you can't just leave the indigenous slot completely empty.
Why not? If the land is empty, isn't it easier to take?
Because if the land was legally terra nullius, which means nobody's land, then the entire U.S. title looks incredibly suspicious to international courts. It looks like raw, illegal conquest.
Oh, yeah.
But if you have officially recognized Indians who you signed official treaties with, well, now it looks like a completely legal, valid transfer of property. You desperately need a substitute beneficiary.
Enter Group B.
Enter Group B. You keep them neatly on reservations. You manage them tightly through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. You graciously grant them trust status. They get to be the official Indians on the movie screens and on all the treaty documents. This ensures the Indian label is legally filled.
It perfectly fills the vacuum they created.
Exactly. And as long as Group B is safely sitting in that chair, Group A, the true allodial landlords, remain totally trapped in their newly assigned African-American identity, completely unaware that the chair actually belongs to them.
It's completely diabolical. It's creating a safe Indian to hide the dangerous Indian, the one who actually owns the whole place.
Safe, because Group B is safely under federal trust. They are domestic-dependent nations. Their title is entirely derivative of the U.S. title.
Right.
But Group A's title, if it were ever formally acknowledged, would entirely predate and supersede the U.S. title. That is precisely why Group A must remain Negro at all costs.
So if we look at the whole board, we have the crime, paper genocide.
Right.
We have the weapons used, the 1705 Act and the 1924 Racial Integrity Act. We have the clear motive, massive land theft.
Yes.
So why hasn't this been fixed in court? I mean, surely if the documentation of the fraud is this incredibly obvious, someone could just sue. The sources mention a specific Latin phrase here, nemo judex in causa sua.
Nemo judex in causa sua. It translates to, no one should be a judge in their own cause. This right here is the ultimate legal dead end for Group A.
Explain that. Why can't Group A just take all these receipts and go straight to the Supreme Court?
Okay, imagine you steal a house.
Okay.
You forge the deed, you change the locks. Eventually, the original owner finds out about the forgery and decides to sue you.
Right. They take me to court.
You are the judge presiding over the trial.
Well, I'm definitely going to win that trial.
Exactly. The U.S. government is the trustee currently in possession of the land. Group A is the true beneficiary. The trustee has effectively stolen the estate by legally renaming the beneficiary.
So if they sue.
If Group A goes into a U.S. domestic court to officially claim their indigenous identity and their land title, they are literally asking the U.S. court to rule that the U.S. government actually has no legal jurisdiction over the land.
They would be asking the court to legally dissolve itself.
Precisely. The U.S. courts derive all their authority from the Constitution, which derives its authority entirely from the territory it sits on.
Right.
If the underlying title to that territory is totally void because of a massive fraud, then the court's very authority to hear the case is void. The U.S. simply cannot be the judge in a trial where it is the primary thief.
That is a catch-22 of epic proportions. The outline also mentions a concept called unclean hands. What does that refer to?
It's a very old equity doctrine in law. He who comes into equity must come with clean hands.
Meaning you can't be guilty of fraud yourself if you want the court to help you.
Right. And the dossier specifically cites a congressional bill, H.R. 1294 from 2007.
What was that bill?
It was a bill regarding the federal acknowledgement of the historical injustice against the Virginia tribes. And in the text of this bill, the federal government effectively acknowledged that official records were destroyed or systematically altered. They actually admitted to the paper genocide.
Wait, they formally admitted the fraud happened?
They formally admitted the records were thoroughly messed up by Walter Plecker. They put it right there in the official congressional record.
So what happened? Did they fix it?
No. They provided no real remedy other than offering federal recognition for a few specific groups. But legally speaking, making that admission on the record is huge.
Why is it huge if they didn't fix anything?
Because in basic trust law, if a trustee officially has unclean hands, meaning if they admit they have committed fraud against the beneficiary, they automatically lose the legal right to administer the estate. They are supposed to be immediately removed.
But since there is absolutely no higher court inside the U.S. with the power to remove them,
Exactly. The sources heavily suggest the only possible venue for this is international,
like the UN.
taking it to BRICS or the UN, because the claim being made here isn't for civil rights. Civil rights are just privileges given by the government to its subjects.
Right.
The claim they're making is for the restoration of the principle.
Restoration of the land and the resources based entirely on the collapse of the trust.
Yes. If the trust collapses completely because of proven fraud, the assets legally must go back to the original owner ab initio, which means from the very beginning. The sources argue so strongly that Group A isn't fighting for a seat at the lunch counter anymore. They are the creditors coming to physically foreclose on the diner.
Wow. Just wow. Okay, let's take a breath and really synthesize this. This is a massive amount of incredibly heavy information. Let's briefly walk through the exact timeline the sources build one more time to make sure we have the whole chain locked in.
Sure. Let's look at the chain of custody of this fraud.
1705, the Virginia Slave Act. The sheer invention of the real estate classification. This is the exact moment of civil death for the indigenous Group A. They're legally stripped of their sovereignty and turned entirely into commercial collateral.
Okay, then step 2.
Step 2 is the identity laundry. Over the next 2 solid centuries, the word Indian is aggressively erased from all the records of Group A. Negro and colored become the catch-all legal terms for the entire trapped workforce. The memory of the great mound builders just fades away into the brutal reality of the cotton gin.
Right. And step 3.
Step 3 is 1924. Walter Plecker completely finishes the job with the Racial Integrity Act. The paper genocide is officially complete. Group A is now legally African on all paperwork. The true Indian category is scrubbed perfectly clean in Virginia.
And step 4 is what you call the install.
Step 4 is the placeholder strategy. Group B, the treaty tribes, are officially elevated as the sole and completely exclusive Native American identity in the country. They happily hold the trust status just to keep the allodial seat warm and entirely empty.
And finally, step 5, which brings us to today.
Step 5 is the awakening. The actual science is finally catching up to the paper trail. The DNA, those tiny 1 to 5 centimorgan segments, is surfacing in thousands of reports.
The linguistics are being revisited.
The paper trail is actively being audited by genealogists.
Mhm.
The receipts are finally coming to light.
It honestly changes how you look at absolutely everything. When you see the Black population living deep in the South, in the Mississippi Delta or the Carolinas, you aren't looking at a transplant population brought over on boats.
Not according to this audit.
You are looking at the reclassified ruins of the original American civilization.
You are looking squarely at the original landlords who have been completely convinced that they are merely tenants.
That. It raises a massive question for the listener. We always try to end these deep dives with a final provocative thought for you to chew on, and today's is just incredibly heavy.
It really is. The fundamental question is this. If you were listening to this right now and you identify your family as Black or African American, what if your long, painful struggle for civil rights is actually a complete legal trap?
A trap?
Yes. Because civil rights are simply rights granted by the existing system. If you actively ask the system for civil rights, you are legally validating the system's ultimate authority over you. You are quietly agreeing to remain the real estate.
Wow. But if the sources in this dossier are right, if your actual DNA holds the biological receipt to the continent, and the government's own admitted records show they deliberately erased your name just to steal your title, then you shouldn't be asking for civil rights at all.
No. You are the creditor. You are calling in the foreclosure on the entire system itself. The whole U.S. economy, according to this constructive trust theory, is completely built on borrowing against the stolen human capital of Group A.
And if Group A wakes up and realizes they are actually the landlord,
The bill is finally coming due.
that is a lot to process. But that is exactly why we do the deep dive. We take the giant stack of papers, we read all the receipts, and we just see where the forensic evidence leads.
Even if it leads to completely rewriting human history.
Especially then. Thank you so much for joining us on this audit. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Stay curious, everyone.